Locked in the suffocating darkness of the panic room, Sloane felt his heart racing against her palm. "I'm your bodyguard, not your boyfriend," he growled, his professional mask shattering. Then he turned the deadbolt, trapping them together, and made his move. "Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're hooked in and excited to dive into this tale, click subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I'll have another captivating story just like this one, and you won't want to miss it. Now, let's get started." The Ashford penthouse was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and secrets, perched 60 stories above the rain-slicked streets of Chicago. For Sloane Ashford, a woman whose mahogany skin was usually draped in the finest silks and whose mind was as sharp as the architecture she designed, the penthouse was no longer a home. It was a high-tech fortress, a golden cage built by her father's paranoia. Every corner was monitored by cameras, every window reinforced against ballistics, and every exit guarded by the man who had become her silent shadow. Cashin Thorne was a presence that seemed to swallow the light. A white man with the broad, battle-hardened build of a former Tier 1 operator. He moved with a lethal silence that set Sloane's nerves on fire. For 6 months, he had been her constant companion, yet she knew nothing about him. He lived by a code of iron. No personal conversation, no eye contact longer than a second, and a 5-foot perimeter of absolute distance. To Cashin, Sloane was a package to be protected. To Sloane, Cashin was a living reminder that the botched kidnapping attempt a year ago had stolen her freedom. She sat on the edge of her Italian leather sofa, her hair styled in intricate, honey-tipped braids that fell over her shoulders. She was wearing a cream-colored silk robe, the fabric cool against her skin, but her internal temperature was rising as she watched Cashin stand by the balcony door. He was a statue in a charcoal tactical vest, his stormy blue eyes scanning the horizon where a massive summer storm was beginning to roll in from Lake Michigan. "You know, the silence is actually more annoying than the threat of being kidnapped," Sloane said, her voice sharp and vibrant. She stood up, pacing the length of the living room. "My father pays you to keep me safe, Cashin." He didn't pay for a mute. Cashin didn't turn. His gaze remained fixed on the darkening sky. "I'm here to identify threats, Ms. Ashford." Conversation creates a lapse in focus. "Ms. Ashford," she mocked, stopping a few feet behind him. "We've shared a living space for half a year. I've seen you eat, I've seen you train until you're dripping with sweat, and I've seen you bleed when you accidentally caught your arm on the gym equipment. Don't you think we're past the formalities?" "No," he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. "Formalities are what keep the boundaries clear. You are the client. I am the shield. There is nothing else." Sloane felt a familiar spike of frustration. She hated how he looked through her, as if she were a piece of furniture he was tasked with guarding. She hated how his presence made her feel hyper-aware of her own body, the way her pulse quickened when he walked into a room, the way her skin tingled when he stood close enough for her to smell the faint scent of rain and cedarwood that clung to him. Before she could snap back, a jagged bolt of lightning ripped through the sky, followed instantly by a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the building. The lights in the penthouse flickered, once, twice, and then vanished. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the red glow of the emergency status lights on the security panels. "Power's out," Sloane whispered, her voice losing its bravado. The trauma of the gala, the screaming, the darkness, the hands grabbing at her, surfaced like a ghost. "Generators should have kicked in by now," Cashin said, his voice shifting into a sharp military tone. He tapped his earpiece. "Security desk. This is Thorne. Report status." Silence was the only reply. Cashin moved instantly, his hand finding Sloane's arm in the dark. His grip was firm, grounding her as the silent alarms on the walls began to pulse a rhythmic, terrifying red. "They're inside the building," Cashin muttered, pulling her toward the master suite. The grid was sabotaged. We're moving to the primary fallback. What? No, wait. Sloane stumbled as he led her through the dark. The sound of heavy rhythmic thuds, booted feet, echoed from the hallway outside the main entrance. Someone was breaching the reinforced doors. Cashin didn't explain. He swept her into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, and stepped into the walk-in closet. He punched a code into a hidden panel behind a rack of her evening gowns, and a section of the wall slid open with a hiss of pressurized air. He stepped inside the 5x5 steel box and pulled her with him. The door slid shut, plunging them into a heavy, absolute darkness. The only sound was the frantic thrum of Sloane's heart and the rhythmic, controlled breathing of the man standing inches from her. The space was so small that she was pressed against the hard plates of his tactical vest. "Stay quiet," he commanded, his mouth close to her ear. Outside the steel walls, she heard the muffled crash of her bedroom door being kicked in. The sound of furniture being overturned and glass shattering filtered through the vents. They were in her room. They were looking for her. The panic Sloane had been fighting finally broke through. The proximity, the smell of his sweat, the rain on his gear, and the terrifying reality that she was trapped again. It was too much. She began to struggle against him, her hands pushing at his chest. "Let me go," she hissed, her voice cracking. "You're just another cage, Cashin. You're just a machine my father bought to keep me in line. You don't care if I'm terrified. You just care about the paycheck." Cashin's reaction was instantaneous. He slammed his hand against the steel wall right next to her head, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tiny space. He leaned in, his body pinning her against the cold metal, his face so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "I'm your bodyguard, Sloane. Not your boyfriend," he growled, the words dripping with a raw, repressed hunger that made her breath stop. "You think this is about a paycheck? I've watched you for 6 months. I know what time you wake up. I know you hate the smell of the lilies your father sends. I know you bite your lip when you're scared." He reached out, his hand finding the manual override switch. With a slow, deliberate motion, he clicked the internal lock. A heavy bolt slid into place. They weren't just safe. They were trapped. "I've stayed in the shadows because it was the only way to keep you alive," he whispered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate register. "But the cameras are dead, Sloane. And I am tired of being a machine." He smiled, a dark, beautiful, and dangerous expression that she had never seen before, and made his move. The manual bolt clicked into place, a sound of finality that seemed to vibrate through the very marrow of Sloane's bones. In the absolute darkness of the panic room, the air became a physical weight, thick with the scent of Cashin's woodsy cologne and the sharp, metallic tang of the weapons strapped to his chest. "What are you doing?" Sloane breathed, her voice a fragile thread. She tried to step back, but her heels hit the reinforced steel of the rear wall. There was nowhere to go. The space was barely 5 square feet, and Cashin Thorne occupied almost all of it. "What I should have done months ago," he murmured. His voice had lost its robotic, clipped edge. It was now a low, dangerous rumble that resonated in the small space. He didn't touch her yet, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the chilled air of the room. Outside, the sounds of destruction continued. A heavy object, likely her vanity, crashed to the floor. Men shouted to each other, their voices muffled by the thick insulation but unmistakable in their intent. They were looking for the Ashford prize, and they were tearing her sanctuary apart to find her. Sloane's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "They're right there, Cashin. This isn't the time for whatever this is. You're supposed to be watching the monitors, checking the perimeter. You're supposed to be my bodyguard." "The monitors are dark, Sloane. The perimeter is breached," he said, his face so close now that his breath stirred the fine hairs at her temple. For the next 20 minutes, until the tactical team I called arrives, I am nothing but a man in a dark room with a woman who has been driving him to the brink of insanity since January. Sloane felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The coat of iron she had railed against was gone, and in its place was a raw, unfiltered honesty that terrified and exhilarated her. She had spent half a year trying to poke the bear, and now the bear was awake and had her cornered. "You're out of line," she whispered, though she didn't push him away. Her hands, still resting against his tactical vest, felt the rapid thud of his own heart. He wasn't the machine he pretended to be. He was vibrating with a restrained energy that felt like a coiled spring. "I've been out of line since the moment I saw you walk across that gala floor in that red dress," Cashin confessed, his voice dropping to a gravelly rasp. "I watched the security footage of your bedroom every night, not just for threats, but because I couldn't close my eyes without seeing the way you look when you're thinking. I've memorized the exact shade of your skin in the moonlight. I've broken every rule in the book just by breathing the same air as you." Sloane's breath hitched. She had always suspected there was fire beneath his ice, but she hadn't expected a sun. The power dynamic she was used to, the billionaire's daughter and the hired help, shattered. In this dark, steel-lined box, she wasn't a client, and he wasn't an employee. They were just two people balanced on the edge of a precipice. Have you ever felt a connection with someone that you knew was completely off-limits? How did you handle the tension? Tell us your story in the comments below and subscribe to see if Sloane and Cashin can survive the night. "Why tell me this now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why lock the door?" "Because if we don't make it out of this room," Cashin said, his hand finally moving to cup the back of her neck, his palm warm and calloused, "I refuse to die without you knowing that I didn't stay because of your father's money. I stayed because I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else touching you." His fingers tangled in her braids, pulling her head back just enough to force her to look up toward where his eyes would be in the dark. The sound of a heavy blow struck the panic room door from the outside. The attackers had found the hidden entrance. The steel groaned, but it held. Sloane flinched at the noise, but Cashin didn't move. He was an anchor, a solid mass of muscle and intent. He moved his other hand to her waist, pulling her flush against him. The silk of her robe felt like nothing against the rough cordura of his vest. "They can't get in, Sloane. Not without thermal charges, and they don't have them," he reassured her, his voice calming the storm in her mind. "But I need you to listen to me. When that door opens, the bodyguard comes back. The mask goes back on. But right here, right now, I'm just Cashin. And I've wanted to do this since the first day I walked into your life." He didn't wait for her permission. He leaned down, his lips finding hers in the darkness. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of suppressed longing and the adrenaline of the hunt. It was the move he had promised, a total abandonment of his professional identity in favor of something much more primal. Sloane groaned into the kiss, her hands sliding up from his chest to wrap around his neck, her fingers digging into the short-cropped hair at the nape of his neck. The world outside, the mercenaries, her father's secrets, the looming scandal, vanished. There was only the heat of him, the taste of him, and the terrifying realization that she was no longer a bird in a cage. She was a woman in the arms of a man who would burn the world down to keep her. When he finally pulled back, both of them were gasping for air. The silence in the room was heavy, charged with the electricity of what had just happened. "Cashin," she breathed. "Don't," he whispered, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Don't say it's a mistake." "Not yet." A series of muffled pops echoed from the bedroom. Flashbangs. Then, the rhythmic chatter of submachine gun fire. Cashin's tactical team had arrived. The rescue was underway, but for Sloane, the real danger was only just beginning. because now that she had tasted the fire, she knew she could never go back to the ice. The mechanical hum of the panic room's secondary extraction vent was the only thing filling the silence after the gunfire outside ceased. Cashin's hand was still on Sloane's waist, his thumb tracing the silk of her robe, but his eyes, now visible as the emergency floor lights cast a dim amber glow, had returned to that sharp tactical focus. The transition was jarring. 1 second, he was a man pouring out years of repressed longing. The next, he was a predator listening for a signal. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The warmth was gone, replaced by the clinical precision of a soldier. He reached for the sidearm holstered at his thigh, the metallic shink of the weapon being checked for a round echoing in the cramped space. The panic room door hissed open. A team of 4 men in matte black tactical gear stood in the wreckage of Sloane's bedroom. They lowered their weapons the moment they saw Cashin. "Area is secure, Thorne," the lead operative said, his voice distorted by a gas mask. 6 hostiles neutralized. 2 in custody. The perimeter is back under our control, but the penthouse is compromised. We need to move the asset. The asset. The word stung Sloane like a slap. 10 minutes ago, she had been a woman he couldn't bear to lose. Now she was back to being a line item in a security contract. She stepped out of the panic room, her bare feet pressing into the plush carpet, which was now littered with broken glass and spent shell casings. She looked at the destruction of her sanctuary, the shredded curtains, the shattered mirrors, and felt a wave of nausea. "Pack a bag, Sloane," Cashin commanded. He didn't look at her. He was busy conferring with his team over a handheld tablet showing the building's compromised thermal feeds. "You have 3 minutes. We're moving you to a secure black site in the suburbs." "I'm not a package. You can just mail to a new address, Cashin," she snapped, her voice trembling with the aftershocks of the adrenaline and the kiss. He finally looked at her, but his eyes were like flint. "You are currently the most sought-after target in the state. My job is to keep you alive so your father can deal with the fallout of his software leak. Now pack, or I'll have my men carry you out as you are." The coldness was a physical barrier. Sloane realized with a sinking heart that he was terrified of what had happened in the dark. He was overcompensating, building the wall back up brick by reinforced brick. She threw a few essentials into a leather duffel, her movements jerky and frustrated. She felt exposed in her silk robe, so she pulled on a pair of dark leggings and an oversized hoodie, hiding the woman he had just kissed beneath layers of armor-like fabric. As they were ushered into the freight elevator by the tactical team, the reality of her life crashed down on her. Her father's secrets weren't just business. They were dangerous enough to turn her home into a war zone. The drive to the black site, a nondescript, heavily reinforced lake house 3 hours outside the city, was silent. Cashin sat in the front seat of the armored SUV, staring at the road, his earpiece glowing a steady, haunting blue. Sloane sat in the back, staring at the back of his head, wondering if the man she had met in the panic room was just a hallucination brought on by terror. When they arrived at the lake house, the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a gray, misty light over the water. The house was beautiful but sterile, surrounded by a high electric fence and a dozen more silent guards. "Your room is on the 2nd floor," Cashin said as they walked through the foyer. He handed her a new encrypted phone. "Don't use the landline. Don't go near the windows without the shutters closed. I'll be in the command center downstairs." "Cashin, stop," she said, catching his sleeve as he turned to leave. He stopped, but he didn't look back. The tension between them was a live wire, humming with the memory of the panic room. What happened back there? She started. What happened back there was a lapse in professional judgment due to high-stress environmental factors, he interrupted, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It won't happen again. I've updated the security protocols. You're safe here, Ms. Ashford." "Miss Ashford," she repeated, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You're a coward, Cashin Thorne. You can face a dozen men with guns, but you can't face the fact that you actually feel something." He finally turned, and for a split second, the mask slipped. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were dark with a struggle he was losing. "Feeling something is what gets people killed in my world, Sloane. My priority is your heart beating, not how you feel about me. Get some sleep." He walked away, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. Sloane watched him go, feeling a strange mix of fury and longing. Is it better to stay safe behind a wall of silence or to risk everything for a moment of truth? If you were in Sloane's shoes, would you push Cashin for answers or let the professional mask stay on? Drop a comment below and subscribe to see what happens when the next threat arrives. Sleep didn't come. Sloane spent the morning pacing the sterile room, looking at the encrypted phone. There was one message on it. Not from her father, but an unknown number. "The bodyguard can't hide you forever, Sloane. Your father's sins are written in your blood. See you soon." She felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. The mercenaries from the penthouse were just the beginning, and the man who was supposed to protect her was currently hiding behind a wall of his own making. The sun had barely begun to burn through the thick morning mist of the suburban lake house when Sloane made her way downstairs. The message on her encrypted phone was a cold weight in her pocket, a reminder that even this reinforced sanctuary was transparent to the people hunting her. She found Cashin in the kitchen, his back to her. He was hunched over a laptop, surrounded by a bank of glowing monitors that displayed the perimeter feeds. The house was supposed to be a home, but with the tactical equipment draped over the granite countertops, it looked like a forward operating base. "I received a message," Sloane said, skipping the pleasantries. She didn't want the Ms. Ashford treatment today. Cashin stiffened, his shoulders bunching under his black t-shirt. He turned slowly, his eyes instantly dropping to the phone in her hand. He took it from her without a word, his thumb scrolling through the brief, threatening text. "Trace it," he barked into his headset, then looked back at Sloane. "When did this come in?" "An hour ago." "Who are they, Cashin? And don't tell me they're just mercenaries. They know about my father's software. They know about me." Cashin sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. He rubbed a hand over his face, the stubble on his jaw rasping against his palm. "Your father didn't just build surveillance software, Sloane. He built a backdoor, a master key that can bypass almost any encryption in the world. He was going to sell the patch to the highest bidder, but the beta version was stolen. The people who have it want the final encryption key, and they think you have it." "I'm an architect, not a coder," Sloane shouted, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Why would he give it to me?" "Because he knew they'd look in his vaults first. He knew they'd look in his mind. But he didn't think they'd look in your blueprints." Cashin stepped closer, his voice dropping. "The designs for the new Ashford headquarters. He hid the key in the structural schematics. He turned your life's work into a treasure map." Sloane felt a surge of betrayal so sharp it made her dizzy. Her father hadn't just put a guard on her. He had turned her into a walking vault. Every achievement she had made, every building she had designed, was just a hiding place for his greed. "So that's why you're here," she whispered. "Not to protect me. To protect the key." Cashin's expression cracked. He moved into her space, ignoring the 5-foot rule he had re-established only hours ago. "I didn't know about the key until this morning, Sloane. My contract was to protect you. Period." "Then why the cold shoulder?" she challenged, stepping into his chest. "Why the professional judgment speech? If you're just here for me, then look at me." Cashin looked down at her, his blue eyes churning with a conflict that seemed to physically pain him. He looked like a man standing on a landmine, terrified that any movement would result in a catastrophe. "I can't look at you and do my job," he admitted, his voice a jagged rasp. "Because when I look at you, I don't see a client. I don't see a package. I see the only thing in this world that makes me feel like I'm not just a weapon anymore. And that makes me weak. It makes me slow." "It makes you human," Sloane countered. She reached up, her fingers grazing the scar that ran along his jawline. He didn't flinch. He leaned into her touch, a broken, desperate gesture. For a moment, the war outside didn't matter. The assassins, the software, her father's lies, it all faded into the background. Suddenly, the monitors behind him began to chime a rhythmic, urgent alert. Cashin snapped back to the screens, his hand instinctively flying to the grip of his holster. "Motion sensors on the north perimeter," he muttered, his eyes scanning the thermal feeds. 3 signatures. They're moving fast. They aren't waiting for nightfall. "How did they find us so quickly?" Sloane asked, her heart jumping into her throat. "The phone," Cashin growled, looking at the device he still held. The message wasn't just a threat. It was a beacon. "They've been tracking the signal ever since you opened it." He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his tactical rifle from the counter and handed Sloane a small, sleek pistol. "You remember what I taught you at the range last month? Aim for center mass. Don't hesitate," she recited, her hands trembling as she took the cold metal. "We don't have time to wait for the local team," Cashin said, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the basement stairs. "We're going to the tunnel. If they've breached the north side, the boat is our only chance." As they reached the heavy steel door of the basement, a muffled explosion rocked the house. The glass in the upper windows shattered, the sound of the blast echoing across the lake. "They're inside," Sloane whispered. Cashin turned to her, his face a mask of lethal intent. He didn't look like a machine anymore. He looked like a man with everything to lose. He grabbed her by the shoulders, pulling her forehead against his. "I'm going to get you out of here, Sloane. I don't care about the key. I don't care about the software. I'm getting you out." "Cashin." "I'm your bodyguard," he growled, the corners of his mouth twitching into a grim, determined smile. "And if I have to be your boyfriend to keep you focused enough to survive this, then fine. But you keep your head down and you run when I tell you. Do you understand?" Sloane nodded, a wild, fierce energy sparked by his words. "I understand." He kissed her quickly, a hard, desperate press of lips, before throwing open the basement door and leading her into the dark. The tunnel beneath the lake house was narrow, damp, and smelled of wet earth and concrete. It was a claustrophobic contrast to the soaring ceilings of the penthouse Sloane had designed. Every few seconds, the ground above them groaned as another explosion or burst of gunfire signaled the systematic destruction of her temporary sanctuary. Cashin moved with a frightening, silent efficiency. He kept one hand on the strap of his rifle and the other firmly gripped around Sloane's hand, pulling her through the darkness. The only light came from the dim red glow of his tactical flashlight, casting long, dancing shadows against the rough walls. "How long is this tunnel?" Sloane whispered, her voice bouncing off the low ceiling. 400 yards. "It exists in a boathouse on the far side of the inlet," Cashin replied, his eyes never stopping their sweep of the path ahead. "If they haven't spotted the exit, we have a fast response skiff waiting. We can be across the lake in 10 minutes. And if they have..." Cashin stopped abruptly. He turned to her, the red light of his torch catching the sharp angles of his face. "If they have, you jump in the water and swim for the reeds. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. My team has a secondary extraction point 2 miles south. I'm not leaving you, Cashin. Not after what you said." He let out a short, jagged breath that sounded like a laugh. "Sloane, I told you I'd be your boyfriend if it kept you focused. Don't let it get you killed. He started moving again, faster this time. As they neared the end of the tunnel, the sound of the lake, the rhythmic lapping of water against wood, became audible. But beneath it was another sound. The low, guttural thrum of an idling engine. Cashin killed his light. The darkness was absolute for a moment before her eyes adjusted to the thin slivers of moonlight filtering through the floorboards of the boathouse above them. Wait here, Cashin breathed. He disappeared up a small wooden ladder. Sloane waited in the shadows, her fingers trembling as she gripped the pistol he had given her. Every muscle in her body was taut, vibrating with the urge to run. She thought about the key hidden in her blueprints. Her father had turned her passion for architecture into a weapon, and now the only person she trusted was a man whose job was to treat her like an object. A sudden, sharp scuffle broke out above her. A grunt of pain, the dull thud of a body hitting wood, and then silence. Sloane. Up. Now. Cashin's voice was a harsh whisper. She scrambled up the ladder. The boathouse was a skeletal structure of weathered cedar. Two men in tactical gear lay unconscious on the dock. Cashin was already at the controls of a sleek, blacked-out motorboat. Get in. Just as Sloane hopped over the gunwale, a spotlight cut through the mist from the shore. A heavy machine gun began to chatter, the bullets shredding the wooden slats of the boathouse. Splinters flew like shrapnel. Stay down. Cashin roared, opening the throttle. The boat surged forward, the nose lifting out of the water as the engine screamed. They roared out of the boathouse into the open lake, the moonlight reflecting off the white wake behind them. Behind them, the lakehouse was a silhouette of orange flames against the dark sky. Bullets hissed into the water around them, throwing up small plumes of spray. Cashin steered with one hand, his other reaching for a flare gun. He fired it into the air, a brilliant, blinding white light that signaled his support team. "We're clear," he shouted over the roar of the wind and water. But as he turned to look at her, the white light of the flare caught something on his side. The dark fabric of his tactical vest was wet. Too wet. "Cashin, you're hit," Sloane cried, moving toward him. "It's a graze. Keep your head down, Sloane. We're not out of this yet. When everything you've built is literally burning down behind you, who do you turn to? Can Sloane trust that Cashin is protecting her, or is he just protecting the secret she carries? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to see if they make it to the city. They reached the far shore, where a nondescript black van was waiting with its headlights off. Two men jumped out, helping Sloane out of the boat while Cashin stumbled, his hand clutched to his ribs. "Get her in the van," Cashin ordered, his face pale in the moonlight. "We head back to the city. The North Side safe house." "The city?" one of the men asked. "Boss, that's where they expect us to go." "Exactly." Cashin gritted his teeth as they bandaged his side. "They think we're running away. They don't expect us to walk right into the middle of their territory. Sloane, those blueprints. Where is the original hard copy?" Sloane looked at the burning horizon across the water. "In the Ashford vault. At the headquarters. The building I built." Cashin nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a grim new understanding. "Then that's where we're going. We're going to use your father's treasure map to trap the hunters." As the van sped toward the Chicago skyline, the professional mask was gone. Cashin reached out, his hand finding hers in the dark. He didn't say anything, but the grip of his fingers was a promise. He wasn't just a bodyguard anymore. And she wasn't just a target. They were a team. The black van wove through the concrete canyons of Chicago like a ghost ship. Outside, the city was alive with neon and rain, oblivious to the fact that a high-stakes war was being fought in its shadows. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and raw tension. Cashin lay back against the seat. His teeth gritted as Sloane pressed a fresh pressure bandage against his side. The bullet had taken a chunk out of his oblique, narrowly missing his ribs. Every time the van hit a pothole, he let out a sharp, hissed breath that made Sloane's heart ache. "You're losing too much blood, Cashin," she whispered. Her hands stained mahogany and crimson. "I'm fine," he grunted, though his skin was the color of parchment. He looked up at her, his stormy gray eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "You're a better architect than a medic, Sloane." "Maybe. But I'm the only one you've got right now." She tied the bandage tight, her fingers trembling. "Why the Ashford headquarters? If they're looking for the key, isn't that the first place they'll look?" Cashin leaned his head back against the window. "Exactly. Hide in plain sight. Your father built the vault to withstand a nuclear strike. More importantly, the security system at the tower is separate from the grid that was sabotaged. It's the one place I can get you behind 6 feet of reinforced titanium and actually call for federal backup without being intercepted." "But to get to the vault, we have to cross the lobby," Sloane countered, her mind racing through the blueprints she had memorized. "The sensors will flag us the moment we walk in." "Not if we go through the loading docks," Cashin said. "And not if we use your override code. The one your father told me about." Sloane froze. "My father gave you my private override? The one I use for late-night design sessions?" "He gave me everything, Sloane. He knew he was a dead man walking. He just didn't want you to be the collateral damage." The betrayal felt like a second wound. Her father had stripped away her privacy, her work, and her safety, all to protect a piece of software. She looked out the window as the massive obsidian spire of the Ashford Tower loomed over them. It was a beautiful building, all sharp angles and glass, a monument to her talent that was now nothing more than a giant target. The van pulled into the dark service tunnel beneath the tower. The tactical team fanned out, their suppressed rifles raised as they cleared the loading bay. Cashin struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Sloane's shoulder. He didn't protest the help this time. "Remember," Cashin whispered as they approached the service elevator. "Once we're in the vault, the signal is dead. No one gets in or out until I trigger the manual release. We'll be safe, but we'll be trapped." "I've spent my whole life trapped in one way or another, Cashin," Sloane said, stepping into the elevator and swiping her keycard. "At least this time I'm choosing the cage." The elevator hummed as it descended deep into the bedrock. When the doors opened, they were greeted by a sterile white hallway that led to a massive circular door. This was the heart of the Empire. Sloane stepped up to the retinal scanner. A thin red line of light swept across her eye. "Access granted." "Welcome, Architect Ashford," a cool, synthetic voice announced. The vault door began to rotate, the sound of heavy gears grinding like a subterranean beast. They stepped inside, and Cashin immediately hit the emergency lockdown. The door hissed shut, and for the first time in 48 hours, the sound of the world disappeared. The vault was filled with rows of servers and physical hard drives, but in the center was a glass pedestal containing a single gold-plated drive. The master key. "We made it," Sloane breathed, sliding down the wall as the adrenaline finally began to ebb. Cashin didn't answer. He had collapsed into a chair at the primary terminal, his face ghostly. He tapped a few keys, bringing up the building's external camera feeds. His eyes widened. "They're here," he whispered. Sloane rushed to the screen. On the monitors, 3 black SUVs had pulled into the loading dock. A man stepped out of the lead vehicle, a man Sloane recognized. It was her father's business partner, Arthur Sterling. "Arthur," she gasped. "He's the one behind this." "He doesn't want the software for the government, Sloane," Cashin said, his voice weak. "He wants to sell it to the cartels." He's been the leak the whole time. Arthur looked directly into the camera on the screen, as if he could see them. He held up a small black device. He has a thermal lance, Cashin cursed. It'll take them an hour to get through that door, but they'll get through. Sloan, listen to me. I need you to find the secondary encryption in those blueprints. If we can't delete the software, we have to scramble the key so it's useless. I can't do that without the original CAD files, she said, her heart racing. They're on that gold drive. Get to work. When the person you trusted like family turns out to be the monster at the door, how do you fight back? Is the master key worth more than the lives of everyone in this room? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to see the final stand in the next twist. Sloan grabbed the drive, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She felt the vibration of the thermal lance beginning to bite into the vault door from the outside. The steel was thick, but it wasn't infinite. She looked at Cashin. He was checking his magazines, his movements slow and pained. He was preparing for a standoff he likely wouldn't survive. Cashin, she said, pausing her work, if we get out of this, I'm not going back to being the asset. He looked at her, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips. I think we're a long way past that, Sloan. Just fix the key. I'll handle the door. The vibration from the thermal lance was no longer a distant hum. It was a rhythmic, bone-deep shudder that rattled the server racks. On the monitors, the vault's external skin was beginning to glow a dull, angry cherry red. Arthur Sterling stood just outside the camera's dead zone, but his voice boomed through the vault's intercom system, distorted and dripping with false sympathy. Sloan, darling, don't be difficult, Arthur's voice echoed. Your father was a dreamer, but he was weak. He built a weapon and then got cold feet. Open the door, give me the drive, and I'll make sure your bodyguard gets a quick, clean exit. Otherwise, this room becomes your tomb. Sloan didn't look up from the terminal. Her fingers moved with a frantic, rhythmic grace, her braids swaying as she leaned into the screen. He's lying, Cashin, she whispered. I know, Cashin rasped. He was slumped against the reinforced interior wall, his tactical rifle resting across his knees. He had used a roll of industrial duct tape from his kit to secure a fresh pad over his wound, but the exertion was taking its toll. His face was gray, sweat beading on his forehead despite the vault's climate control. How much longer? He asked, checking his watch. The encryption is layered into the building's structural load-bearing calculations. I have to rewrite the fundamental geometry of the software to scramble it, Sloan explained, her voice tight. 10 minutes. Maybe 12. You have 5, Cashin said, his voice dropping into that low, commanding tone. He struggled to his feet, using the wall for leverage. He moved to the center of the room, dragging a heavy equipment crate to create a makeshift barricade facing the door. The heat is weakening the locking pins. Once they breach the seal, the pressure differential will blow the door inward. Sloan felt a cold spike of terror. She looked at the gold drive, then at the man who was prepared to die in a windowless box to protect it. Or rather, to protect her. Cashin, if they get in here. They won't get past me, he interrupted, his eyes meeting hers. The bodyguard was fully back now, but there was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before the lake house. Focus on the code, Sloan. Be the architect. Rebuild the world so they can't have it. Sloan turned back to the screen. She pulled up the 3D rendering of the Ashford Tower, her greatest achievement. She saw the lines of code embedded in the virtual support beams. It was genius and it was evil. Her father had turned her vision of beauty into a skeleton of surveillance. With a surge of righteous fury, she began to delete. Not just the key but the entire backdoor. She rewrote the logic gates, turning the master key into a dead end. A deafening crack echoed through the vault. A jet of white-hot sparks sprayed through the top of the door. The air in the room suddenly smelled of scorched metal and ozone. "Sloane! Get down!" Cashin yelled. He shoved her beneath the heavy steel desk just as the vault door buckled. With a roar of tortured metal, the massive circular slab was blown off its hinges. Smoke and dust filled the room, illuminated by the flickering red emergency lights. Through the haze, 3 figures in tactical gear stepped into the breach. Cashin didn't wait. He opened fire from behind his crate, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of his rifle deafening in the enclosed space. One of the attackers went down instantly, but the others dove for cover behind the server racks. "Give it up, Thorne!" Arthur's voice screamed from the hallway. "You're bleeding out in a hole. Save the girl." Cashin didn't respond with words. He threw a flashbang into the hallway, the blast momentarily blinding the men at the door. He turned to Sloane, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Is it done?" 90%, she shouted back, her fingers blurring over the keys as the progress bar crept toward the end. "I just need to initiate the wipe." A bullet ricocheted off the desk inches from Sloane's head. She flinched, but she didn't stop. She saw Cashin take a hit to the shoulder, the force of the impact spinning him around. He groaned, a sound of pure agony, but he stayed upright, switching his rifle to his offhand and continuing to lay down suppressive fire. "Cashin!" she screamed. "Finish it!" He roared back. When your life's work is the only thing standing between survival and a global catastrophe, do you hit delete? Would you sacrifice your greatest achievement to save the person you love? Tell us in the comments and subscribe for the heart-pounding conclusion in the next twist. Sloane looked at the screen. Wipe sequence initiated. 99%. 100%. "It's gone," she cried. "The key is destroyed, Arthur. There's nothing left to steal." The gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. He looked at the smoking server bank and then at the girl who had just turned his billion-dollar payday into digital ash. "You little brat," Arthur hissed. "If I can't have the software, I'll take the satisfaction of ending the Ashford line right here." He leveled the gun. Sloane closed her eyes, waiting for the end. But instead of a shot, she heard a wet, guttural growl. Cashin had moved. Despite his wounds, he had lunged across the gap, his combat knife drawn. He tackled Arthur just as the gun went off, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the ceiling. The 2 men crashed into the server racks, a blur of motion and violence. Sloane grabbed the heavy brass paperweight from the desk, a model of her first building, and ran toward the struggle. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. As Arthur gained the upper hand, pinning the weakened Cashin to the floor, Sloane brought the heavy metal down on the back of Arthur's head with every ounce of strength she possessed. Arthur went limp. Cashin pushed the man's body off him, gasping for air, his shirt soaked in blood. He looked up at Sloane, his eyes wide with shock and a strange, flickering admiration. "I told you," she panted, her braids disheveled and her eyes fierce. "I'm not a package. And I'm definitely not your boyfriend's victim." Cashin let out a weak, bloody laugh and reached out his hand. "No, you're definitely not." In the distance, the real sirens, the federal response team, finally began to wail through the building's vents. The high-pitched whine of the vault's emergency ventilation system fought against the heavy, static-charged silence that followed the fight. Sloane stood over Arthur Sterling's prone body, the brass model of her building still gripped in her hand like a scepter. She was shaking, but her eyes were clear. "He's alive," she whispered, checking the pulse on Arthur's neck. "But he's not going anywhere." "Good," Cashin rasped. He was slumped against the central server pedestal, his hands pressed hard against his side. The white-tiled floor was stained a dark, terrifying crimson around him. Because I don't think I can take another round. Sloan dropped the brass model and scrambled to his side. Cashin, stay with me. The feds are in the lobby. I can hear them on the comms. She grabbed his face, her mahogany palms framing his pale, sweat-slicked cheeks. You did it. You kept me alive. Cashin's eyes fluttered, focusing on her with an effort that seemed superhuman. No, Sloan. You saved yourself. You wiped the drive. You took down Sterling. He managed a weak, lopsided grin. I think I'm definitely fired. Shut up, she choked out, a laugh breaking through her tears. You're not fired. You're under new management. The vault was suddenly flooded with light as a tactical unit in FBI windbreakers stormed through the breached door. Medics followed close behind, their orange bags bright against the smoke-stained room. Step away from the subject. An agent shouted, but Sloan didn't move. He's the one who saved this city, she screamed back, her voice echoing with an authority that made the agents pause. And he's bleeding out because of it. Move. The next hour was a blur of motion and clinical noise. Sloan refused to leave Cashin's side as the medics stabilized him and loaded him onto a gurney. She followed them through the Ashford Tower, past the wreckage of the lobby, and into the cool night air. The street was a sea of blue and red flashing lights. As they loaded Cashin into the ambulance, an older man in a charcoal suit stepped out of the shadows. It was her father, looking smaller and more fragile than she had ever seen him. Sloan, he breathed, reaching out a hand. Thank God. The software. Is it safe? Sloan stopped, her hand on the ambulance door. She looked at her father, the man who had used her as a human safe deposit box, the man who had let her believe she was a prisoner rather than a daughter. It's gone, Dad, she said, her voice like ice. The back door, the master key, the whole empire you built on secrets. I deleted it all. Her father's face went pale. You what? Sloan, that was worth billions. It was our legacy. No, Sloan countered, stepping toward him. It was a target on my back. If you want a legacy, build something that doesn't require a man to take a bullet for me just to see the sun. Don't call me. I'm moving my things out of the penthouse tonight. She didn't wait for his reply. She climbed into the back of the ambulance and took Cashin's hand. 3 days later, the world looked different. The Ashford scandal had dominated the news cycle. Arthur Sterling was in federal custody, and Sloane's father had been forced into a very quiet, very permanent retirement. Sloane sat in a quiet hospital room overlooking the lake, the sound of the heart monitor a steady, comforting rhythm. Cashin was awake, propped up on pillows. He looked human without the tactical gear, just a man in a hospital gown with bandages peeking out from the collar. You're still here, he said, his voice stronger now, though still possessed of that low, gravelly timbre. I told you, Sloane said, looking up from her tablet. She had been sketching, actual designs this time, for a community center in the South Side. New management. I'm not letting my best asset walk away. Cashin looked out at the water, his expression thoughtful. The agency called. They want me back. They offered me a lead position in D.C. Sloane felt her heart drop, but she kept her expression neutral. Is that what you want? No, Cashin said, turning back to her. He reached out, his hand taking hers. This time, there was no glove, no weapon between them. Just skin on skin. I spent 10 years being a shield for people I didn't care about. I think I'd like to try being something else. And what's that? The guy who walks the architect to her front door, he whispered. Without the earpiece. Sloane smiled, leaning in until her forehead rested against his. The coat of iron was dead. The gilded target was gone. Sometimes, the only way to find your true self is to burn down the life everyone else built for you. Have you ever had to walk away from a legacy to find your own path? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe for the final part, where we see Sloane and Cashin's new world. I think I can live with that, Sloane whispered. But as they shared a quiet, lingering kiss, a knock came at the door. A young woman in a sharp suit stood there, looking nervous. Ms. Ashford, I'm from the City Planning Commission. We've seen your leaked designs for the tower's green space. We want to talk about a contract. Sloane looked at Cashin, a spark of pure, unadulterated joy in her eyes. The architect was back, and this time she was building something for herself. It was no longer a collection of targets and fortresses, but a blueprint of possibilities. She stood on the balcony of her new apartment, a loft in the West Loop she had bought with her own money, designed with her own hands, and filled with sunlight that no camera lens would ever touch. She wore a simple linen dress, her braids piled high on her head, and for the first time in years, the scar on her shoulder didn't itch with the memory of fear. She was an architect again, and her firm, Ashford and Associates, was already making waves for its focus on transparency and community-driven design. The sound of the sliding glass door behind her made her smile before she even turned around. Cashin walked out, moving with a fluid grace that showed no sign of the bullet wound that had nearly claimed him. He wasn't wearing a tactical vest or a hidden earpiece. He wore a soft gray sweater and a pair of jeans, looking every bit the man he had promised to become. The Planning Commission just sent over the final approval for the South Side project, he said, handing her a glass of wine. It's official, Sloane. You're building the future. No, she said, taking a sip and leaning into him. We are. Cashin wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. The 5-foot rule was a distant, ridiculous memory. In its place was a bone-deep connection that had been forged in the dark of a panic room and tempered in the fire of a vault. I still can't believe you did it, Cashin murmured, looking out at the city. You walked away from a billion-dollar legacy and built something better from the ashes. My father built a world where everyone was watched, but no one was seen, Sloane said, looking up at him. I'd rather build one where people feel safe enough to be themselves. I think that's the only legacy worth having. The transition hadn't been easy. The legal battles to untangle herself from her father's crumbling empire had been grueling, but Cashin had been there every step of the way, not as a shield, but as a partner. He had started his own high-end private security firm, one that focused on ethics and real protection rather than the shadow games Arthur Sterling had played. So, Cashin said, his eyes dancing with a rare, playful light, now that the project is approved, what's next for the great architect Ashford? Sloane turned in his arms, looping her hands around his neck. Well, I was thinking about designing a house. A real house. Somewhere with a lot of windows, no panic rooms, and a very large garden. A garden, huh? Cashin smiled, his hands settling on her hips. Does this house have a room for a guy who's still technically your bodyguard? He's not my bodyguard anymore, Sloane whispered, her voice thick with affection. He's the man who showed me that I didn't have to be a package to be worth saving. And I think he's exactly the person I want to come home to every night. Cashin leaned down, his lips ghosting over hers. I think I can live with that contract. He kissed her then, a slow, deep seal of a life reclaimed. It wasn't the desperate, adrenaline-fueled kiss of the vault. It was a promise of 1,000 quiet mornings and 1,000 peaceful nights. The city breathed below them, vibrant and free of the master key that had once threatened to unlock its darkest secrets. Sloane Ashford had spent her life designing buildings, but in the end, she had built something far more enduring. She had built a life where she was finally the one holding the keys. Victory isn't always about defeating an enemy. Sometimes, it's about choosing a partner who sees your strength instead of your status. Have you found the person who makes you feel like you don't need a shield? Share your victory moment in the comments and subscribe to join our community of survivors. As the moon rose over Lake Michigan, casting a silver path across the water, the two of them stood together, the architect and the soldier, watching the lights of the city they had saved. For the first time, the shadows were just shadows, and the future was wide open. Thank you for following the journey of Sloan and Cashin. Their story is a testament to the fact that we are more than the roles we are forced to play. If you loved this tale of professional boundaries being shattered for true love, please leave a comment and subscribe to our next dramatic romance. See you in the next story.